So General Ham, General Wagner, teammates, Horlander's apparently here to keep me straight, but he hadn't given me any money lately, so I'm not sure I'm going to get anything out of this deal either. But that's a joke. He actually takes pretty good care of us. Dan, great to see you as always. And Gwen, thanks for being here this morning. Also shout out to my old battle buddy, not old in terms of age, just old in terms of years, Pat Donahue, who was DCG at Forcecom, and we were together down there. And for everybody else, thanks for being here. So two things real quick, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through some stuff, and I'm going to take about 10 minutes to make a few remarks about sort of just level the bubbles on what's going on in America's Army Reserve and sort of how we see ourselves, and to General Ham's point, how we see ourselves integrated and nested with the mission of the United States Army and the Joint Warfighter. So, Chief, once I finish my two sort of opening notes, you start the 10-minute clock, okay? All right. So, number one, today is the 111th birthday, or I should say the 111th anniversary of the inception of the third component of the United States Army. So, for those of you who don't know it, today is the celebration day for America's Army Reserve. Started in 1908. We're still here, so it's 111, so that's sign of the angels, right? 111. Big deal. Last year, on this day, we were cutting a cake on the hood of a Humvee at Fort McCoy, Wisconsin, putting rounds down range. And the year before that, we were in Times Square, of all places, cutting a cake there, which is kind of interesting. Sunday morning, and people actually stopped by, and 6 million people watched us cut a cake, which is pretty cool. I don't know how many recruits we got out of that, but it was awesome. So that's point number one. So this is a big day for us, so thanks for being here. Number two, just in case nobody was paying attention, or some of you weren't, this is the first year in history when the University of Virginia won the NCAA basketball tournament. Cool. So whether you're a Wahoo or just somebody who loves Wahoos, Wahoo Wah, all right? It's a big deal for us. My wife's a Tar Heel. I said, hey, it's been a while since Virginia won. She said, you guys have never won. And, of course, Chapel Hill's won like 7 of them. So anyway, it was a big deal for us. All right, slide. So I just want to talk real quick about sort of how we see ourselves and some of the challenges as we move into the future. I've talked to many of you about many aspects of this before, so I'm going to rip through this pretty quickly, and I'm not going to camp out on anything. But this is if I had to encapture, and crystallize sort of the challenge we have inside America's Army Reserve, and I would submit that the Army Guard has many of the same challenges we do in this regard. It's balancing risk to mission and risk to force. And the way I articulate it basically is our challenge is we got to be ready enough to be relevant to support the joint warfighter, but we can't be so ready our soldiers can't keep good, meaningful civilian employment and healthy and sustaining family lives. That's easy to say. It's not such an easy balance to strike. And we're going to talk a little bit about that and why that tension point's there. One of the things that I sort of picked up on in fact, it was AUSA last fall. And Tim Cadavy, the director of the Army Guard, had given a talk. Every year we do an Army Guard, Army Reserve sort of joint, social call at the end of the day. And Tim had talked to the team about his view of his responsibilities from a programming perspective, policy perspective, getting after sort of at the top level the things that the Army Guard's really focusing on, and how he was expecting and counting on the tags to execute mission at echelon based on the fact that they're the ones that got to actually take care of that force and be able to field that force and present it. And by the time he was done thinking, I was like, I got to do both, which is why I wear different patches on different days and everything else. Because from a risk to mission perspective, as the Chief of the Army Reserve, I want to make sure we can present those forces that we need. But as the CG of America's Army Reserve, I'm also very, very focused on making sure we aren't burning our soldiers by training too hard so they can't keep those families and they can't keep their civilian jobs. Slide. All right, a lot of stuff packed into this. This is frankly just a sort of a snapshot of or a synopsis of the things we're pushing hard on to build readiness. So it's really all about combat readiness, capability, and lethality for the next fight. When I took command a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, coming out of being Chief of Staff of Northcom, I came in pretty paranoid. Chuck Jacoby, who had been the commander at Northcom, used to say, if you're not paranoid when you get here, you damn should be paranoid when you leave. So after 4 years of being the chief, I came here wicked paranoid. So we started focusing on what do we have to do to support the next fight. And it was basically a threat-based, plan-based assessment of what kind of capabilities did the Army Reserve need to generate and what kind of time frame. Slide. I don't need to lecture anybody in this room about where we are. And if you haven't heard the chief's speech from, I think it was 2 years ago at the breakfast, or the luncheon rather, there's nobody who's more adamant about or more passionate about or more articulate about the threat environment which we're currently operating. I throw this up here to let you know that everything we do inside America's Army Reserve fundamentally is focused on making sure we're cognizant of and responding to and lead turning the threat environment which we operate. Slide. All right, so this is sort of, if this is one of the two money slides sort of in the deck. And the only reason I say this is many of you have seen variations of this before. This is essentially that some of the skills that are embodied or embedded in what we call RFX, which is Ready Force X. And the reason it's an X is because it keeps changing depending on the war plan, how we tweak the flow, the tip fit, what the commander's CRD is, what needs to be where, when, that sort of thing. The reason I put this up here is to give you some idea of the magnitude of the challenge we have when it comes to balancing readiness and at the same time making sure, as I said, our soldiers can keep particularly good civilian jobs and obviously keep their families together intact and sustaining. So we bin our forces in three bins in terms of and when we talk RFX, we're talking about the first 90 days of any major contest. And I'm not talking about Afghanistan or Iraq. I'm talking about an existential war with a peer competitor. Inside these bins, you'll see different things. So you see the stress formations in the middle. Stress means simply that about 50% of everything that we have inside the Army Reserve falls into that bin of formations that have to go quickly, capabilities that have to go quickly. I say formations, but the reality is RFX is predicated on a very basic principle, very simple principle, which is we got to be in favor of what's going to happen. If we know we need certain capabilities and we know we need them fast, we got to go find those formations that are the most capable, or I should say in some cases the least incapable, mature those capabilities very quickly through a thing we call aggregation, and then present those forces to the warfighter. Inside these bins, first 90 days, as I said, of a major contest, stress formations are formations of which 50% of everything we have in the Army Reserve has got to go quickly to that fight. If you look to the left part of the slide, unique formations. These are formations characterized by capabilities that are, by and large, resident in the Army Reserve exclusively. 70% or more of the entire capacity of the United States Army, and that bin to the left, exists only in Compo 3. In some cases, everything the Army has in that capability set exists in that left slide. So this is a big deal for us, but where it gets really fun, and I would regard this as strategic risk, is the right side, because the right side is the combination of two. So that means it's got to go quickly, and it's got to come out of the Army Reserve. So that we're getting into no-fail space, because nobody else can do it, and we got to do it fast. So we looked at these things and we said, okay, so let's figure out what do we mean by fast? When I first started off, we were talking about we'll fight tonight. Well, we don't fight tonight. Okay, the earliest deploying unit I have has 3 days from the time we say go to the time it has to be someplace. You say 3 days is like fight tonight. No, it's not. It's fight tonight after tomorrow night. Okay, so it's fight fast. So we say we fight fast. We don't fight tonight. 82nd Airborne Division and Rangers, they can fight tonight. We'll fight 2 days after they start. Okay, so but that's the green square for some of those capabilities. Slide. All right, so this is notional, but it's not. The reason it's notional is because this is an unclassified slide. I will just tell you that inside the capabilities we just talked about, which, by the way, represents on orders of magnitude some 42,000 soldiers in America's Army Reserve. So that's about 1/3 of the entire deployable strength of the component on any given day, because we got soldiers in school and soldiers that have issues medically and all kinds of reasons why they may have some deployability issues. But 1/3 of the entire formation's got to go out the door in less than 100 days. This gives you a sense of how we look at what we have to do first and how long it's going to take us and how much time do we need prior to essentially having to deploy those forces into combat in terms of mobilization time. Some formations, usually because of the complexity of the formation or the mission, are going to have to take more time to get mobilized, get their final collective training experience, get all their equipment in the right place, et cetera, and deploy into theater. These numbers out here to the left, those are just the number of days prior to meeting the CRD for a war plan, prior to the war starting, that we need in terms of time to deploy those forces. Put simply, if M, the day of mobilization, equals the day of the beginning of the conflict, this is all risk, because some of these timelines, I can't meet them if we don't have mobilization prior to the initiation of hostilities. This drives a strategic conversation about whether or not you believe mobilizing Compos 2 and 3 is essentially a provocative act that is likely to set into motion other cascading events or other trigger points that would lead to miscalculation and increase the likelihood of combat operations ensuing, or whether you look at it as a flexible deterrent option that says essentially, hey, one of the ways you telegraph to potential opponent is you're getting serious because you got to mobilize certain capabilities prior to the initiation of combat operations. Particularly for Compo 3, because one of our responsibilities is in many cases to set the theater, to provide the warfighter with critical embedded enablers. And unlike the Guard, I would say, which adds massive combat capability to the Army from a capacity perspective, many of the things, as I said on the slide before, that reside in the Army Reserve only reside in the Army Reserve and are critical key enablers that have got to go fast. And as I said, in some cases, within 3 days of when we're told to go. Those forces, by the way, just so you know, are not forces that would have to deploy into theater. Those are forces that are needed right here in the homeland to do certain critical functions to make sure that the logistical enterprise of the Army is beginning to respond to and operate in support of the warfighter. So that's this slide here. Frankly, raised a fairly interesting set of conversations inside the Army about can we start a mobilization process prior to the beginning of hostilities ensuing or not. I would tell you I regard that as an open question. But what we have said about this, and there's no daylight between Andre's not here today, but the G4 of the Army and me on this one, or General Perner for that matter. What I've said is if we can't get some time to get ahead on some of these things, we need to look at rebalancing force structure in the Army. Because some of the things that are in Compo 3 probably shouldn't be in Compo 3 if I don't have any time to generate that capability prior to needing them. Slide. Okay, this is again notional. This actually doesn't give you a good idea of how the scope of the challenges of getting from essentially from home station to a mobilization platform, drawing equipment out of whether it's an equipment concentration storage site or some other location, whether it's a training set at a training installation like Fort McCoy, Wisconsin, or other places. But the idea is here is simply to show the fact that if you take this and multiply this by a coefficient of 50 or 100, we're talking about a significant amount of movement very quickly in Compo 3, and I would submit that Compo 2 is going to have the exact same map in terms of the challenges for the Guard to move equipment and soldiers to different places, and so is the active component, and so is the joint force. On orders of magnitude, just in this, again, this sort of lowballs the amount of effort required to move all this stuff very quickly to meet mobilization timelines. I'll just tell you, on orders of magnitude, this is 4 times more stressful than anything, just in terms of bulk, anything the Army Reserve's ever done in terms of the amount of stuff that has to move and people that have to move very quickly for any major event. And this is essentially from a cold start. When I say cold start, what I mean by that is we're assuming that we have had no involuntary mobilization authority to direct people to move and do things until this process begins. Slide. This is just very briefly, I want to talk a little bit about the future. For those of you who aren't tracking, about 2 years ago, we recommissioned the 75th Training Command that's down in Houston, Texas, to become the 75th. Is that my time? Okay, that's it. So that's good. I'm done. No, well, we recommissioned. He took me seriously, man. He couldn't even look at his watch. He had to set the alarm. All you need to know is, where's JP? So JP's looking at his phone too, but he's timing me. But I've already admitted to JP, we are not where we need to be as far as doing talent management in the Army Reserve, but we are committed to supporting Army Futures Command through the 75th Innovation Command in Houston, Texas, to making sure that we are going out there and we are finding, retaining, and in some cases assessing. Hey, Chief, go outside. Go. You know, so he's gone. I know I got other warrant officers in here, but they are the technical experts in the Army. You know that. We're talking talent management. They are the technical experts in the Army. Just saying. So there you go. That was all staged. I knew that was going to happen. Yeah. But speaking of talent management, part of what I discovered when I took command is we've got soldiers that are working in Tesla and SpaceX, Google and ARL and all kinds of other places. And so we're really trying to get arms around that talent and then help that talent inform us as to how we better get after what I call digital key terrain to make sure we're assessing into the Army or retaining in the Army those capabilities, whether it's cyber, AI, quantum computing, biomedical research and experimentation and enhancements and those sorts of things. We're using the talent that's out there in America, in the private sector, primarily of America, through America's Army Reserve, bring it back into the Army, bring it back into the Joint Force, and operationalize it And we're still in the process. This is a journey of discovery, frankly. But if I had a slide up here of where the 75th is, I'll just tell you, every place you think that there's probably some pay dirt from a high-tech perspective, we already have scouts out there, and I get a lot of help from a lot of senior legislators, whether they're congressmen or senators, who think I should be looking at other cities in their states and in their districts about other places where a lot of innovative stuff's happening in America in the private sector. Slide. Okay, so Chief's back. No, he still hadn't figured out his phone. Okay, so the big idea, balancing risk to mission, risk to force, making sure we understand that at the end of the day, the things that you need out of this component of the Army, we can do it, we can deliver it, but it takes time. One of the things that I've said to senior leadership is, there's only so much you can do in terms of resourcing this with money, because fundamentally, ultimately, it's not about money, it's about time management, right? Because for every dollar we're spending on training, as important as it is, okay, that's a dollar spent on an activity that's keeping that soldier away from their civilian job. And so I got to constantly remember, and we all have to remind ourselves, 92% of this force has got civilian employment. And we got to honor that, and we got to maintain that relationship, because the value we bring, which I would say is significant to this fight, is we bring massive additional capability at a huge discount to the taxpayer in terms of how much it costs to do it. Okay? Questions?
First off, that's a great update, Chip. Thanks for that. In terms of the stress units, what's the training day floor for exposure of soldiers that fall into that category? Like how many days a year? Do you have funding for that minimum day per year?
So we palm, yes, sir. So we palm for, and I'm going to, it sort of depends on the formation, and it depends on how quickly it has to go. But in broad strokes, six extra days. Meaning some formations we get more than 6 days, and some get a few more days. But from a POM perspective, from a programmatic perspective, we looked at 6 extra days. And I'll say this, I'm not saying we're as good as we can be or as good as we're going to be, but we're a lot more ready than we were 3 years ago. And we're getting to a point where I watch very carefully those indicators that tell me that we've over-revved this in terms of pushing. And there's a balance between, candidly, there's a balance between sort of my push to get, and I take personal responsibility for this. I had to explain it to the Senate 2 weeks ago, to really get after reducing non-deployables and increasing our ability to generate stuff quickly and shrink that post-mobilization timeline that you saw up there. But at the same time, in messaging that and in resourcing it, I'm also cognizant of the fact that I may have created an environment where some soldiers think it's too hard to do this. So what I try to message back to the entire force is, hey, we don't want to lose any talent because we made it too hard. We just got to figure out a way to make sure we're monitoring that, metering it. I will tell you this, from a recruiting perspective, we're ahead of where we're missioned to be right now, so we're doing okay. And our attrition is the lowest it's been in 18 years. So we're right now we're good, but I'm not complacent about that.
Sir, happy birthday. Looking back at the map that you had on the United States, what about the West Coast pre-positioning equipment and mobilization, given what could happen in China?
Yeah, so again, we're going to work on that slide, okay, because that slide does not give you a sense of the magnitude. Those are just notional things. So those points of presence up there were, I'd say, notional. They don't really depict the magnitude of where things have to come. So you got a unit, for instance, in Southern California, and it may have equipment stored in a couple different places. Some of it may be pre-positioned in APS in the Pacific already. And one of the challenges is making sure we get the right equipment in the right place from a training set perspective, from an APS perspective, from a concentration storage site perspective. And here the other challenge we have, and this is not unique to Compo 3, is we got to make sure we understand who's actually going to move that stuff if it's got to move. When the soldiers in that unit have got to go someplace to fall down a training set at Fort McCoy or some other place as part of the MFGI process. So there's some mission command challenges involved in that as well.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you. Hi, sir. Ashley Trussell,
good to see you.
Inside Defense.
Good
Good to see you too.
Yeah.
What is your ideal balance between training in weapons training like marksmanship or gunnery versus cyber training and some of the AI and tech stuff? Because I know there have been a couple of training exercises recently on some of the marksmanship stuff, but do you have any exercises planned for the cyber and other things?
Yeah, so we participate in Cyber Shield and other well, I'd say a couple things. One, we participate in cyber related exercises and TTXs. We also are trying to up our game, and this is not unique to Compo 3. If you go out to NTC or any other training platform where all three components train together, you'll see we, the Army, are really up on our game in terms of trying to create disruption in the electromagnetic spectrum, whether it's cyber or other things that mimic sort of jamming. I think we're getting better at trying to test ourselves and push ourselves to fight in a more degraded electronic environment. I don't want to get out over my ski tips and tell you I don't think we are where we need to be. Although my guess is most folks would agree with that. I think this is one where we got to continue to up our game, but we also don't want to lose the training value from a collective training perspective of shutting down an entire exercise because we took down all the comms for 4 days. So we got to sort of work that balance. But we work it pretty hard. Yeah.
Hey, good morning, sir.
Yeah.
Colonel Mark Henry. I'm with the Joint Enabling Capabilities Command at Naval Station Norfolk.
Yeah.
This is just kind of your opinion question. Get your thoughts on, the JEC is an integrated AC-RC model that relies very heavy on RC capability. It seems to work very well.
Yep.
Any thoughts you'd like to share on what you think of this model? Does it have more utility? The future of it can be expanded, or is it just leave it as it is?
So, well, I won't speak to the JEC specifically. I mean, I'm aware of its capabilities. I think there is I'll just say, I think there's some places where it's easier to and probably more efficacious to have the total force working together than in others. I think that part of the challenge from my perspective, even internal to the Army Reserve, when you look at the number of forces and capabilities that we have to field very quickly, the reality is there's about 650 to 700 AA formations that are captured in there. But we're going to reach into about 1,200 to 1,300 units to actually generate all that capability and as I said before, aggregate it. So getting after and sustaining cohesion of that force is a big challenge. I think that there's a lot of goodness in the components training together as best we can, so we all learn what the demands are across the total force and how we all fit in together, because we're all going to fight that way. But it's easier to say that sometimes than it is to do it. I'll tell you, the Army Reserve partners very closely with several tags in several states on large exercises. We work very closely with Compo 2 in places like Northern Strike in Michigan, where all three components of the Army come together with the Marine Corps, with the Air Force to play together for long periods of time. Same thing in the Dakotas and Wyoming for Golden Coyote. So we're always looking for places where we can collaborate and work together. But I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all construct, frankly.
Chip, if I may, just returning to this, to your very first slide in striking this challenging balance between readiness and civilian employment, for the business leaders here and for those who work in businesses across the nation, can you talk just a little bit about the importance of employer support to the Guard and Reserve? Because we've seen, frankly, some instances where that's starting to get chipped away at a little bit.
So, sir, so thank you for that. So a couple thoughts. One is, obviously the employer support, the Guard and Reserves, huge additive capability to make sure that our soldiers are being taken care of. And it's obviously all components and it's all services. I get asked a lot of, should we increase the level of sort of protections that our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines receive pursuant to federal law? My view of that, admittedly somewhat uninformed, is probably not. And the reason I say that is because I want to make sure that we don't create an environment legally where there's essentially, there's the scarlet ESGR on every one of our potential soldiers' foreheads because employers are concerned if they hire this person on, they may have a liability going forward legally. So what I've said, and I talked to both leadership in the House and the Senate about this, and I try to be very guarded about embracing any particular way ahead. But what I have said, to your point, is we need to make sure we continue, and I try very hard to do this personally, messaging to the influencers of America. They need to go out there and influence other influencers about the value of employers sharing the best talent in the world with us, and the fact that that is part of the strategic fabric of the national defense of the United States of America. That's a partnership in terms of sharing talent. What I've also said is, and this is where I get kind of guarded, say, hey, look, I'm not a senator, I'm not a congressman, nor do I think I'm ever going to be one, but if I were, one of the things I would think about would be whether or not, as a matter of national policy, we want to incentivize employers to share that talent. I mean, fiscally incentivize them. And I don't know whether that's a tax credit or a tax deduction or whatever, but I would at least think about it. Not so much because it would be a huge game changer for any particular business, but I think it would send a strategic message as a nation how much we value this shared talent with Compost 2 and Compost 3. And again, I don't know the administrative load that puts on the Internal Revenue Service or how you administer it or whether there's a cut line between large employers and small employers, but I do think that there should be a conversation out there about whether or not there's ways we should be thinking about, from the matter of tax policy, incentivizing those employers that share talent with us. I'm also very cognizant of the fact that it's easier by and large, and this is a general statement, I acknowledge that, easier by and large for large corporations to absorb a loss of, Hokinson for a year than it is for a small business. So, we honor that too. But it's, I actually regard as part of my responsibility as we try to balance that risk to mission, risk to foresight, to make sure I'm doing everything I can to, at the top level, message that to the employers of America and to our senior leadership in the Congress.
Any other questions for General Luckey? Let's give him a big hand. Thank you, sir.
Cool.